Hi, this is Paul Mallory from the Thrive Tribe. What are you thinking about right now? What did you spend all last week thinking about? What will you spend the next week thinking about? Are the thoughts that you have true? In other words, are they accurate reflections of reality? Or are they sometimes inaccurate or inconsistent? Do you believe everything that you think? These may seem like odd questions, difficult questions, some of them, aren't they? What did I think about all last week? No idea. And it might feel like thoughts and ideas are just reality, they're just real life, it's just me. That's who I am. I am those thoughts. That's just me being me. But here's a question. Would it shock you to discover that not every idea we have is factual and accurate? That we make errors in our thinking? That we jump to wrong conclusions? Would it shock you to discover that there are around 200 or so cognitive biases listed in Wikipedia? You can Google this and have a look. Cognitive biases are shortcuts that the brain takes to make decisions and judgments. They are deviations from rationality. We leap over the rational thinking straight to a conclusion so that we can make a fast decision or judgment. So those are cognitive biases. We have around 200 different cognitive biases potentially. And those are operating much of the time. So those are deviations from truth and fact. For example, just to give you one example, do Google and have a look. To give you one example, I've talked about it before in videos, confirmation bias, which is the tendency our brain has to go and look for evidence to back up a preconception that we already have. So if you have a point of view about a particular group of people or about the way the world is, your inbuilt tendency is to notice the evidence that supports what you believed already, rather than noticing the evidence for the opposite to your preconception. So we're biased in our thinking. We have inbuilt bias. And all of that thinking and all of those cognitive biases lead to attitudes and behaviours. They lead to how we see the world and therefore how we think and how we act in the world. So, why does all this matter? Fundamentally, we don't see the world and people the way they are. We see the world and people the way we are. In other words, we look through a pair of these, through a pair of glasses, through a pair of spectacles. We have an expression in the UK where we say you're looking through rose-tinted spectacles, which means you're seeing things more positively than they are in reality in that case. So rose-tinted spectacles, but that's just one expression. We are looking, each of us, through a different pair of these, which is all of our attitudes and our biases and our views about the world. This is the filter through which we look at the world. Our beliefs, our biases, our prejudices, our feelings, our thoughts, our ideas, that's what we see. We see what we expect to see. Isn't this true? If you have a particular attitude or belief about a certain group of people, don't you see that regularly? You're not really looking for the opposite, are you? You're not looking for the opposite examples. So, if people think that it's the youngsters who are really irresponsible during the pandemic, to take an example, if we think it's the young people who are behaving badly, we will notice all the examples that back up that point of view. We will notice all the examples of young people behaving badly. And we won't notice, not least because they don't make the news, we won't notice all the young people who are absolutely doing the right thing and helping us all to get through the pandemic. So you can see already that filter, that belief, that pre-existing belief, we go and look for evidence to back up that belief because it makes us feel good, it boosts our ego. We feel like we're right about the world. There we are, I told you that was the case. We don't like so much emotionally to discover we're wrong about the world, or that another explanation is possible, or that maybe I'm prejudiced, holding a bias, maybe I'm just looking at this badly. We don't like that feeling. However, if we want to get to truth and fact, we have to admit the possibility that we may occasionally be wrong about something. I hope you would agree. So we see what we expect to see, basically, looking through these tinted spectacles. Now, why does it matter what we're thinking? There are two types of thinking. There is what we might call higher thinking, which is where we're making rational judgments, we're using a process, we're using criteria, and we're moving towards facts. We're moving towards a factual understanding. That's where we're applying some rationality, what I would describe as critical thinking, or I have described as freestyle thinking, meaning we're really challenging ourselves to get to the truth rather than just looking through these biased perspectives. So that's higher thinking, very rational, very analytical, very process and criteria driven. Lower thinking, the second type, is automatic thinking. It's automatic ideas. It's not about facts. And quite often these thoughts are distorted according to beliefs, biases, and generalizations. So our lower thinking is the stream of thoughts we have which just happen automatically. We're not applying any rationality or any form of really thought through analysis. They are just happening. They're just firing. These thoughts are firing. We have, how many do you think, thoughts per day? There was a story just this week in the press. The psychology department at Queen's University in Canada has done a study, and they say that we have more than 6,000 thoughts per day. I calculate that that's about 375 thoughts per hour. I've ignored dreams while we're asleep. While we're awake, we're having about 375 thoughts per hour, which is 6 every minute, which is 1 every 10 seconds or so. That's a lot of thinking, isn't it? What are all these thoughts and how accurate are they? And the image that sprang into my mind when I was thinking about this is, imagine there's a little guy on a bicycle who's cycling along behind you wherever you go, and he's shouting at you through one of those loud hailers, or you may know it's a megaphone, or in America, a bullhorn. One of those things you see people using on demonstrations where they're shouting through a loudspeaker, either an electronic one or a manual one, to be heard above the crowd. So let's call it a bullhorn. I quite like the expression. And let's call the guy who's cycling along shouting at you through this thing, let's call him Mr. Bullhorn. So Mr. Bullhorn is cycling along wherever you go. This is terrifying, isn't it? He's cycling along behind you wherever you go, shouting his opinions and judgments at you every 10 seconds. And that's what your brain is doing. That's exactly what your brain is doing. This guy, he's noisy, he's opinionated, he's judgmental, he's always got a perspective on everything. He has a point of view about everything. He gets angry about some things and he gets sad about other things. But he's not always factual. He is the stream of automatic thinking. You can see, I hope, that it would be quite healthy to apply some judgment and filter and rationality to what Mr. Bullhorn is shouting at us. In other words, it will be healthy for us to use our higher thinking, the rational process, to check the lower thinking, which is Mr. Bullhorn, to see whether he is talking nonsense, which he does quite often. Our automatic firing thoughts and ideas quite often are nonsensical. Not always, but quite often. And you know, after a few years, we don't even see Mr. Bullhorn anymore. We just take his ranting through the megaphone, through the bullhorn. We take his shouting for reality. We think that's the way the world is. Sometimes he shouts things like, "You're walking fast today, you must be very fit." So that's a thought you might have. That's quite a nice thing for him to shout at us, isn't it? Or he might shout at us, "Hey, I think that attractive woman just smiled at you. You must be a good-looking sort of fellow." That's quite nice. I quite like that. Sometimes he shouts things we don't like. Sometimes he shouts, "So you didn't get that job, just like your father always said, you'll always be a loser." Doesn't he shout things like that sometimes? Or, "Your boyfriend doesn't call you as much as he used to, so looks like he's bored with you." That's the kind of unfiltered automatic thinking we are having all of the time, every 10 seconds. So he's shouting, Mr. Bullhorn, he's shouting his automatic thoughts in a stream of consciousness. He doesn't apply any rational judgment. So might he be inaccurate sometimes? Might he be inconsistent in the things he shouts? Absolutely. But here's the thing, we forget it. We forget this, and we take what he says as fact and as truth. We don't see this as Mr. Bullhorn shouting at us. We see this as just the way the world is. We have to begin to recognise that this is not fact, this is not truth. It's automatic firing of thinking, and it's a guy on a bicycle shouting at us. All of that builds up. Can you imagine every 10 seconds he shouts something? Imagine how over the days and the months and the years that builds up into attitudes and beliefs. We may come to believe that we're no good. We may come to believe that we're ugly. We may come to believe that we're not very fit. And all of that creates our moods, how we feel. There's a continuum of moods from very happy to very sad, and all points in between on that sliding scale. Those are our moods. So all of that shouting is causing us to be somewhere on that scale, and it varies from day to day, doesn't it? Moment to moment. Now, most people, we slide up and down the mood scale, and we apply our higher thinking to cope with Mr. Bullhorn and to keep us level and steady. What happens in people who are in a depressed state, who have depression, is their judgment tends to be distorted against themselves. So they tend to interpret what Mr. Bullhorn shouts more critically of themselves than other people might. Tend to believe the negative stuff, and we tend to build that up into bigger and bigger stuff, which slides us further and further down the mood continuum towards the very sad end. Now that can lead in extreme cases, and depression can be mild, it can be moderate, it can be severe. In severe cases it can lead to feelings of dejection where we feel hopeless or miserable. It can lead to self-loathing, we hate ourselves. It can lead to a lack of enjoyment, we just can't take pleasure in things anymore. Loss of feelings of love, we find it difficult to show love or to feel love. Crying a lot, or maybe not crying at all because we're all cried out, we've done it, there's nothing left in terms of tears. It can lead to a loss of humour, we don't find anything funny anymore. Feeling worthless, feeling like a failure, feeling hopeless, the future looks very black. Feeling like I'm to blame for all kinds of things in the world, even things external to me. I'm really to blame, I'm causing that, I'm to blame for that. Indecision, can't make decisions anymore. Believing we are ugly, having no willpower, no desire to do anything. Feelings of avoidance and escape, just wanting to get away and to be left alone. In extreme cases, suicidal thoughts. And suicidal thoughts can range from just the general thought of the idea of ending one's life through to people very seriously considering doing it. So a whole range there of different suicidal thoughts. It can lead to dependency on others, where we require a doctor to help us survive life. We can't do it alone. A loss of appetite. It's like the joy goes out of everything, including eating, aversion to sex, the physical side of life. Insomnia, not being able to sleep, and just being too tired to do anything. Quite often severely depressed people find it very difficult to even get out of bed and do something. Now I've just described pretty much the severe end of depression, and if you're in that state, that's a very difficult place to be and a difficult place to come out of. Other people may be at the more moderate or less end of that depression scale. A guy called Dr. Aaron Beck, MD, researched all this 43 years ago now, in 1977. He's the professor of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania and wrote an excellent book called Depression, Causes and Treatment, which I have the second edition of from 2009. But his original research was in 1977. He is known as the father of cognitive therapy. And one of Beck's breakthroughs was through his research into moods and what causes moods and so on. His breakthrough was that thought, or what is sometimes called cognition, meaning thought, ideas, affects mood. Now, before Beck, it was generally accepted that mood causes distortion of thought. So we felt bad and that caused us to think incorrectly. And to some extent that's true. But Beck's big breakthrough was to notice that actually what's causing these bad moods, what's causing this depression in people is the thoughts they're having, the ideas they're having, and the way they build those into attitudes and beliefs about the way life is. So this offers real hope in the area of depression. If depression is caused by our attitudes and beliefs, arising from our thoughts, from our cognitions, then maybe we can learn to strengthen our higher thinking to keep our lower thinking in its place, to keep Mr. Bullhorn in his place. We're never going to get rid of him. We're always going to have automatic thoughts. We do every day, as I said. But maybe we can use our higher thinking to interpret Mr. Bullhorn and just keep him in his place a little bit. So hence cognitive therapy, that's really what it aims to do, because what it does is it helps people to gain objectivity towards their automatic reactions and to counteract them. So to look objectively, apply a bit of fact-finding and a bit of analysis to Mr. Bullhorn's ranting through the megaphone. And also to modify cognitive patterns for the future. So it's very preventive as well, cognitive therapy. How is that done? The person who is feeling depressed is guided to reflect on the evidence or lack of evidence for their thoughts and beliefs. So there are weekly sessions involved, there is homework involved for the person who's taking stuff away to do at home to work on. And the person is being encouraged to reflect on the evidence or lack of evidence for their thoughts and beliefs. In other words, not just to believe everything Mr. Bullhorn says, but to critically analyse, are these things factual? What is the evidence for these things being true? Where is there no evidence for these things being true? And what is the evidence for the opposite being true? Very powerful stuff when you get into this. It's a collaborative empirical process, which means that the person works very closely with the therapist in a partnership, in a collaborative partnership, and that they empirically look at what has happened, what the thoughts were, what caused those thoughts to arrive, what attitudes and behaviours those thoughts led to. And it's very supportive as well as being directive by the therapist, directing someone in terms of what they need to address. When we're depressed, we see ideas as facts more often, and we tend to have a negative bias. So we tend to assume that what Mr. Bullhorn is shouting is factual, and we tend to believe the negative things we hear. That's what is leading us to be depressed. And those behaviours, therefore, that we're exhibiting are modified through this cognitive therapy approach. So in therapy, the current thinking is modified and beliefs are corrected. Negative attitudes are identified, problems are pinpointed, strategies are developed to deal with these thoughts. There is monitoring, there's reviewing on an ongoing basis, and there's measurement of how successful are we being in changing this. So it's very scientific, actually. It's not it's not just based on hope. The research of Beck showed that this is very successful, that it does work, and the therapy is measured to determine how successful it's being in having the desired result, which is agreed between the person being treated and the therapist. So it's a therapeutic, supportive relationship between the two people. Usually somewhere between 14 and 20 sessions, weekly sessions, with success measures, as I said, and homework to do for the person undergoing the therapy. Now, is it effective? Cognitive behavioural therapy, as it's now called, since Beck's time it's been developed, CBT or cognitive behavioural therapy has been found to do at least as well as antidepressants. So there is a 50% recovery rate. So it actually is a very effective treatment. And Also, CBT leads to longer periods without relapse into depression than chemical treatment does. So it's more effective in preventing relapse than taking medicine. And for those people who it does work for, they regain control over their lives and their emotions. So CBT has an ongoing positive effect even after treatment. So it seems to be a very good way of trying to deal with this problem of depression when we get into this morass of negative thinking which drags us down. Is depression a big problem? The World Health Organization has done research on this and says that in rich countries, mental illness accounts for nearly 40% of all illnesses. Can you believe that? Mental illness accounts for nearly 40% of all illness. And in contrast, for example, stroke, cancer, heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, if you add all of those up, they account for less than 20% of the total of all illness. Mental health is 40%. It's a massive problem and it's getting bigger. It's also a hidden problem because it's internal. We may know that there's something wrong with somebody by the way they're acting or they're acting out of character, but we don't necessarily know what it is. With physical illness, most people get treatment. If you break a leg, if you have a physical external disease, generally speaking, you will get treatment. With mental illness at the moment, 1 in 3 people get treatment, which is shocking. Why? Why do they not get treatment? A few reasons. Stigma. Still, people don't like to admit that they have a problem mentally. We all have to get used to admitting this to one another. We all have to talk about it more. It's getting better, I think. Certainly in the UK anyway, where I am. People seem to discuss it more. People seem more willing on social media and so on to admit that they have issues. None of us are immune. We will all have moments when we feel low in life. There's a good chance that many of us will have moments when we're in depression in our lives. So we must stop thinking that this is something that happens to someone else. Everybody is potentially vulnerable. So we need to be able to spot it in others, to help others and support them, and to have them do that for us as well. So there's still some stigma of people not wanting to admit to it. Maybe seen as a weakness, they might not want to admit it in case it jeopardizes their position at work, for example. The more enlightened employers are absolutely on board with all this and run programs and encourage people to talk and so on. Guess what? Employers lose a lot of days of productivity through people being out of the office or out of work because they're suffering. And it doesn't matter whether you're suffering physically or mentally. If you're out of work and you're suffering, you need help. So the more enlightened employers are starting to understand this and do something about it and create programs and encourage people to seek help. There's an ignorance about the treatment. So what I've told you about CBT, I'm not sure how widely that is known. If it was widely known that there was such a fantastic treatment, for sure there would be more of it happening. There are some great programs in the UK at the moment, for example, to introduce it quite widely. I'll talk about that some more in a minute. I don't know how it is elsewhere, but we need more. We need a lot more treatment. So ignorance of the treatment. And there's still some ignorance amongst senior policymakers, I think, whereby, again, you can't see mental illness. I think they assume it's something that happens to somebody else. They apply stigma often in thinking, this is something we shouldn't talk about, and it's mental illness. It's a bit scary. We need to change that. We need to change all that. What can we do? What can you do? What can I do? What can all of us concerned about this subject, for ourselves, for our loved ones, for strangers, for colleagues, for everyone, and I think we should be concerned about everyone. What can we do? Number of things. First thing, if you know someone is feeling low or seems to be a bit out of sorts or feeling low, please talk to them and please listen. One of the greatest gifts you can give someone in this world is to spare them the time to listen sincerely and actively to them. It's one of the things that's missing in this world of short attention span, clickbait, fakery. One of the things that's missing is the ability to sit and listen to someone. And also, it takes an element of courage to be willing to sit and listen to someone's personal problems and not be afraid of what they might say to you. There are training courses that can help with that, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But please try to listen to friends and colleagues who are willing to talk to you about how they're feeling. Equally, be willing to talk to someone who's willing to listen to you. Second thing, if you are feeling low, ask for help. If you think you're depressed, or even if you've just been in a low mood and it seems to be hanging on, ask for help. In the UK, and I'm sorry this is UK centric, but it's where I am, so it's where I see the resources most easily. In the UK, if you Google IAPT self-referral, you will find the CBT programme on the National Health Service in the UK. IAPT stands for Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, and it's a brilliant idea whereby you can do self-referral. You don't need to go through a doctor. You can simply go and apply to join the programme for CBT. IAPT self-referral. Outside the UK, I'm sorry I can't be specific, at least talk to your doctor and ask for some cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT. Third thing, if you are low and need to talk to someone, and again, if you're in the UK, please call the Samaritans. I've mentioned them in previous videos. You do not have to be suicidal or even having suicidal thoughts to call the Samaritans. They will be delighted to hear from you if you're feeling low and you just want to talk to somebody. So Google Samaritans, find the number and call them. For people outside the UK, I'm afraid the Samaritans is, as far as I know, still a UK only service. However, they do have a fantastic website. I do recommend you look at the Samaritans website, where you will find interesting articles and things that may be of help. Fourth thing we can do, if you'd like to educate yourself more on the subject of depression, I can recommend two fantastic books to you. The first one is quite academic. This is the Aaron Beck book that I mentioned, that the research was based on, where he developed cognitive therapy. This is called Depression, Causes and Treatment, 2nd edition, 2009. That, as I say, is an academic book. It's not a self-help book. It contains all his research, definitions of all the different mental illnesses that you may encounter, and also his description of cognitive therapy. So if you're just interested in that subject on a more academic basis, that's a fantastic book. And this one here by Richard Layard, Thrive, this is called, coincidentally, you're watching the Thrive Tribe, is a wonderful book, a truly wonderful book. Richard Layard actually developed that IAPT program that I mentioned earlier in the UK, driven by his desire to see people helped in this area. And this book not only describes the illness, the treatment, it also goes into the economics of it, why we should absolutely have widespread mental illness treatments and programs, because not least because of the economic benefits to the nation. He makes the case absolutely unassailable. Anybody reading this book could not fail to support what he suggests we do, and everybody in a position of authority should read this book. If you know one of those people, please buy it for them and make them read it. So a couple of resources there. Oh, also Richard Layard, who wrote the Thrive book, started a fantastic website. This is a busy guy. He started a fantastic website called Action for Happiness. Wherever you are in the world, Google Action for Happiness. You can sign up there, you can join. I did just the other day when I discovered it. They have an app which will send you pings to your phone with prompts for things you can do to add to your happiness, and really going into the whole question of how do we raise our general level of well-being and happiness. It's a wonderful, wonderful initiative, which I couldn't praise highly enough. And finally, whether you're depressed or not, I would suggest we all, in order to thrive, which is what these videos are about, we all need to work on our higher thinking versus our lower thinking and our mindfulness. All of us, we touched on this in the wellbeing videos that I did, all of us can improve our ability to use our higher thinking, and all of us can reduce the hubbub and frustration and noise of Mr. Bullhorn and his lower thinking, the automatic thoughts that we have, which are random, we can reduce that level of noise with practice, with skill. So all of us, whether we're depressed or not, ought to be working on that, and noticing that it's not who we are, it's not us, it's a guy on a bicycle who's shouting at us, and we need to calm him down a bit and not believe everything he says. He's not always correct. He's quite often wrong, which is the basis of CBT, isn't it? Looking into that. I hope you found that useful. Please do leave comments. I'd love to know what you think, your suggestions for where we might go next in this conversation. And please, as usual, pass this link on to others who might benefit from it. This is a massive problem, mental health, and we all have a part to play in doing something about it. So please pass it on. Please cause as many people as possible to see this video. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.